She didn't flinch. Not when the flashlight blinded her. Not when the baton was raised. Not when power came in the shape of a badge and fear. It was just another Tuesday night in Jefferson Park. Cold wind, empty streets. Elena Brooks, a martial arts instructor, walked home after class, alone but calm. She'd taken this shortcut 100 times, but this time a squad car pulled up. Officer Kyle Donovan stepped out. He didn't ask, he demanded. A search, no reason, just force, just suspicion. Elena looked him in the eye. She didn't yell, she didn't run, she stood still. But in that stillness, something shifted. If you've ever wondered what real strength looks like, what calm defiance means, keep watching. Because tonight, one woman didn't just survive injustice. She turned it into a mirror, and what stared back was the truth. Elena didn't blink. The baton hovered midair, gleaming under the street lamp like a silent threat. Officer Donovan's breath was heavy, his knuckles white around the handle. But Elena, she just breathed, slow, centered, ready. This wasn't just a woman in a hoodie with a gym bag. This was years of training, of control, of knowing that true power isn't in the strike, it's in the restraint. Donovan shouted again, "Open the bag, now!" But Elena's eyes didn't leave his. Her voice, steady as stone, replied, "Tell me why." 3 words. That's all it took to turn suspicion into fury. Because Donovan didn't want answers. He wanted obedience, and she gave him none. Her stillness wasn't passive. It was a choice. 1,000 tiny calculations. His stance, his weight distribution, the tension in his right shoulder. He was about to swing. She knew it, but she didn't move. Not yet. This was where her discipline came in, where instinct begged her to react. But her training said, wait. One wrong move, and she'd be the threat. One sudden gesture, and the headlines would read differently. So she did the most powerful thing a person can do under pressure. She stayed human. This is what they don't teach on police forms or academy drills. This is what living with targets on your back teaches you. How to survive. How to stay soft in a world that demands you harden. Donovan didn't know that. He only knew rage. He wanted escalation. He wanted to control the story. But Elena, she had already rewritten it by refusing to play the role he wanted. Just then, footsteps echoed in the distance. A teenager across the park had stopped walking, lifted his phone. R.E. A small red dot blinked into life, and so did accountability. Elena saw it, so did Donovan, and the shift was instant, because now he wasn't the only one watching her. Now the world had eyes, and just like that, what was supposed to be a private show of force turned into a public reckoning. This isn't just a story, it's a reminder. You don't need to fight to win. Sometimes your greatest weapon is the choice not to use one. Want more stories that flip the script? Hit subscribe. Stay until the end, because this one's just getting started. The red light blinked. A digital eye opened and didn't close. The teenager didn't shout. He didn't interfere. He just filmed. Quiet, still, but powerful. Like a signal, it rippled. Joggers slowed down. A couple walking their dog stopped mid-step. Phones came out, 1, 2, 5, maybe more. Jefferson Park, once empty, now had an audience, and that changed everything. Donovan's voice faltered, just for a second. His baton dipped, uncertain. Not because he feared Elena, but because he feared the lens. That's the thing about cameras. They don't blink. They don't forget. They don't misremember. And for people like Donovan, that's terrifying. Elena remained still. She knew what was happening, what had to happen. The moment the crowd arrived, her safety wasn't guaranteed, but it was multiplied. Not because these strangers would jump in, but because truth had company. Donovan tried to reassert himself. You people don't understand what she did. But his voice cracked. He didn't sound like an officer. He sounded like a man drowning. Every move he made now felt exposed, like even the wind was judging him. Elena said nothing, because she didn't need to. Her silence was louder than his shouting. And in that moment, as tension coiled tight and the park watched with held breath, Donovan made his move. But this time, Elena would answer. Not with force, Not with rage, with mastery. He moved, a shift in his shoulders, a tightening of his jaw. Donovan's intent was written across his body like graffiti. Elena saw it before he knew he'd committed. That's the thing about rage. It screams before it acts, and trained eyes read it like a book. He lunged, fast, unthinking, a fist clenched around the baton, the other reaching to grab her shoulder. But Elena didn't panic. She turned, not away from him, but around him. A pivot, smooth, minimal. His momentum betrayed him. He went forward. She sidestepped, and he stumbled into the space where she had been. Gasps echoed from the crowd. Donovan spun, red-faced. "You resisting? You think this is a game?" No answer. Elena's breathing remained calm. Her hands never clenched. They floated in that familiar readiness. Open, responsive, not attacking, not submissive. Donovan swung the baton, high, brutal, a diagonal arc meant to intimidate or injure. Elena stepped inside the arc. One arm deflected his with a soft snap of contact, her forearm against his wrist, while the other redirected the baton down and away. Not a block, not a hit, a redirection, like water turning stone. His weapon clattered to the concrete. A louder gasp now, phones zoomed in. And Donovan, he froze, stunned. How the hell did you... But Elena wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to win. She was surviving with grace. Her body didn't attack. It protected. Every motion was purposeful, born from years of martial arts. Judo, Aikido, Tai Chi, disciplines that taught her how to listen to violence without repeating it. Donovan lunged again, this time with fists, a wild swing toward her jaw. She dipped under it, clean, grabbed his elbow, not to twist, not to break, just enough to guide him past her. His own force carried him forward, off balance. He stumbled, again. The crowd was silent. Tension filled every inch of the air. No one cheered, no one laughed. Because it wasn't a fight, it was a revelation. Violence, when met with control, reveals itself for what it truly is. Weak, desperate, and loud. Donovan backed up now, confused, shaking. His hand reached toward his radio, but stopped halfway. The look in his eyes changed. This wasn't the cocky officer who stepped out of the car. This was a man unraveling, thread by thread, under the weight of being watched and not being feared. He looked down at his baton, then at the phones, then at her. "You think you're better than me?" he hissed. Elena didn't respond. She tilted her head, eyes steady. "I don't need to be better than you," she finally said. "I just need to be better than what you expect." Those words hit harder than any punch. Because what had he expected? That she'd scream, beg, fight back with fury? Instead, she'd stood tall, moved clean, held dignity like armor. Donovan's chest rose and fell rapidly. Sweat dotted his forehead now despite the chill in the air. He looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would see him as the authority. But all they saw was a man undone by his own assumptions. One more charge, his last. He rushed in, trying to pin her arms. Elena lowered her weight, anchored her feet, and flowed with his momentum. Using a technique she'd taught 100 times, she turned her hips and redirected his body to the ground, gently but definitively. Donovan landed on his back, hard but unhurt. She stepped back, didn't press the advantage, didn't humiliate him. She simply stood, hands open, eyes calm. The fight was over, and she'd never thrown a punch. The crowd finally exhaled. Some clapped softly, more in awe than approval. The teenager with the phone whispered, "Holy shit! She didn't even touch him." Elena heard it, but she didn't smile. This wasn't victory. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about making it home. And in a world where that wasn't guaranteed, not for women, not for people of color, not for anyone without a badge, her stillness had become her shield. The silence was broken by sirens in the distance. More blue lights approached. Donovan, now sitting up, held his hand to his head. For a moment, he looked human again, small, broken, maybe even ashamed. But Elena didn't look away, because real strength doesn't gloat. It bears witness. The second set of sirens was different. Not rushed, not chaotic, measured, professional. Elena heard them before she saw them. Those steady pulses of warning coming not as a threat, but as resolution. The crowd parted almost instinctively as a second cruiser rolled to a smooth stop at the edge of the scene. From it stepped Sergeant Michael Hayes, tall, dark-skinned, mid-40s, with a presence that didn't need to shout. No flashlight in hand, no weapon drawn, just observant eyes, and an unmistakable command in his stillness. He scanned the situation in seconds. One officer on the ground, scuffed, panting, hand near a dropped baton. A woman standing upright, breathing steady, hands visible, calm. A semicircle of witnesses, phones held steady, no one yelling. A park that had turned into a stage. Hayes walked straight toward Donovan. No drama, no delay. "Status," he said, flat and neutral. Donovan opened his mouth to speak, then hesitated. It was the first time all night he looked unsure. He glanced at Elena. She resisted, got physical. Hayes raised one palm. "Stop, are you hurt?" Donovan blinked. "No, but..." "Is she armed?" "No." "Did she strike you?" Donovan clenched his jaw. "Not exactly, but she..." Hayes turned to Elena. His voice softened. Not patronizing, just human. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Hayes. Are you hurt?" Elena shook her head slowly. "No, sir." "Do you need medical attention?" "No." He nodded, then turned slightly toward the crowd. "Who was filming?" 5 hands went up. Hayes didn't flinch. "Please send the footage here." He pulled a card from his pocket. On it, a department email, no personal name. One of the teens asked, "He was gonna hit her, man. She didn't even fight. She just, dodged him." "I understand," Hayes replied. No anger, no defensiveness, just procedure. Donovan was beginning to sweat again. "You're just gonna take her word for it?" he asked, voice rising. "I was doing my job." Hayes stepped closer. "Officer Donovan, stand up." Donovan obeyed. Hayes held out his hand. "Your weapon." "What?" "Badge and firearm, now." Gasps echoed. Donovan's face turned pale. "Wait, you can't be serious. She was provoking me. She questioned my orders." Hayes didn't repeat himself. He just stood there, silent, composed, immovable. The kind of silence that doesn't ask permission. It demands respect. Donovan looked around, for backup, for allies. He found none. Elena said nothing. She didn't need to. The crowd said nothing. The footage already had. Shaking, Donovan reached down, unclipped his service weapon, and placed it in Hayes' open palm. Then his badge. He held it for a second longer, then released. Hayes tucked both away, not triumphantly, just cleanly. "You are hereby suspended, effective immediately. Internal Affairs will contact you within 24 hours. Do not speak to any press. Do not approach the complainant." Donovan stared at him. "But I'm a cop." "You were." Then, without further comment, Hayes turned back to Elena. "You're free to go, Ms. Brooks, or, if you'd prefer, we can escort you home." Elena didn't speak for a moment. The adrenaline hadn't fully worn off, but she could finally feel the ground beneath her again. "I'll walk," she said. Hayes gave a nod of respect. Not duty, not obligation. Respect. "Then I'll walk with you. Off the record." They moved away from the park, slowly, step by step, while the crowd began to scatter, minds buzzing, hands still holding phones filled with evidence. Hayes waited until they were out of earshot. "Self-defense instructor, right?" Elena glanced at him. "Martial arts, mostly judo, some aikido, a little tai chi." "Makes sense," Hayes said. "Your stance gave it away. You weren't aggressive, but you weren't afraid either." She smirked slightly. "I didn't have the luxury." He nodded. They walked another few feet. "I'll be honest," Hayes said. "We've had concerns about Donovan before. Reports that never went anywhere. Lack of footage, gray areas. But tonight," he tapped his phone pocket, "tonight the gray got replaced by 4K. Elena exhaled. Not relief, not satisfaction, just a slow, tired breath of release. Hayes looked over. "I'm sorry," he said. And it wasn't hollow. It landed with weight. Not just for what happened, but for how long it's been allowed to happen. She stopped walking. You want to fix it? He paused. That's the goal. Then stop training people to control others, she said. Start teaching them how to control themselves. Hayes looked at her. Really looked. I was about to ask you the same thing. She frowned slightly. We're putting together a community advisory panel. Real-world instructors. People who understand restraint. Not from a textbook, but from life. He held out a card. We need teachers, not enforcers. Elena stared at it for a long second, then took it. Not a yes, but not a number. They stood in silence for a moment more, then parted. And as Elena walked the last stretch home, her footsteps were slow, steady, and alone again. But this time, watched by no one, chased by no one, feared by no one, just a woman on a sidewalk, in control of her story. Detective Laura Jensen was not a woman who wasted time. Within 48 hours, she had the full report on her desk. Official statements, bystander videos, an incident timeline, Officer Donovan's personnel file, and 3 different angles of the moment his baton hit nothing but air. She watched every clip in silence. No reaction, just eyes scanning, pausing, rewinding, again and again. No weapon on the civilian, no provocation, just a calm woman refusing to obey without reason, and a cop who cracked under the absence of control. Jensen leaned back in her chair and exhaled sharply through her nose. Damn! Internal Affairs was often painted as the bad guy, the enforcer of the enforcers, the cleaner. But Laura didn't care about reputation. She cared about truth and policy had been broken, repeatedly. She opened Donovan's internal file, 23 commendations, 7 informal complaints, 4 use of force reports, 2 supervisor flags with no follow-up, 1 official warning, buried under a sea of bureaucratic jargon, and now this. She clicked over to the new case file. Civilian, Elena Brooks. Occupation, martial arts instructor. No priors, no civil suits, no complaints filed against her ever, not even noise complaints from her classes. The more she read, the clearer it became. This wasn't an isolated moment. It was a crack in the wall, finally big enough to let daylight in. She met with Donovan that afternoon. He sat stiff in the chair, arms crossed, jaw tight. Still wearing the suit, not the uniform, but the arrogance clung to him like old cologne. You're making a mistake, he started. No, she said calmly. You did. Donovan shifted. She was resisting. By asking you why you wanted to search her bag? He didn't respond. Jensen folded her hands. You know what struck me most about the videos? The restraint. Hers, not yours. She was baiting me. She had a look on her face. Jensen held up a hand. Stop. Please don't say the look on her face in an internal affairs interview. It never helps. Donovan leaned forward, voice low. You weren't there. You don't know how it feels when they look at you like you're the threat. Jensen blinked, slowly. She wasn't armed. She wasn't hostile. And every single bystander and camera says the same thing. She didn't escalate. You did. I didn't hit her. But you tried, several times. He slumped back, exhaling. I thought she was dangerous. She is, but not to you, to your idea of control. The chief pinched the bridge of his nose. How bad is it? It's clear, and it's viral. The original video has 1.2 million views in 3 days. Delacroix cursed under his breath. We'll have to cut him loose, he muttered. Jensen shook her head. Not enough. What do you mean, not enough? If you cut him loose, he pops up in another department 6 months from now. Different badge, same mindset. I'm recommending full termination with misconduct designation. Delacroix looked up. That's a big swing, Jensen. She held his gaze. Then let's stop pulling punches. By Friday, the department made its move. A formal press release was issued. Officer Donovan was terminated following internal investigation and video confirmed misconduct. The department reaffirmed its commitment to transparency and community trust. It sounded good, polished, respectful. But beneath the language was something real, a shift, not revolutionary, not overnight, but noticed. The story didn't end there. Local papers picked it up first, then regional outlets. Woman neutralizes officer without violence. Martial artist diffuses, cop with calm. Caught on cam, control versus chaos. Cable news followed. Interviews were requested. Elena declined most of them. She didn't want to become the story. She had a life, a studio, a calling. But eventually, she said yes to one. A live town hall hosted by the city council. Not for drama, not for pity, for impact. The auditorium was packed. Officers sat in the first few rows. Behind them, students, parents, activists, skeptics. Phones everywhere. Expectations even higher. Elena stood on the stage, small under the lights, but unmoved. She wore no makeup, no designer clothes, just jeans, a black sweater, and eyes that had seen things. She stepped to the mic. "My name is Elena Brooks," she began, "and I'm not here to bash anyone. I'm here because control without understanding is a weapon, and because a badge should protect the people it serves, not defend the people who misuse it." She paused. "I didn't want to be here. I wanted to go home that night, eat dinner, and grade my students' belt tests." A soft laugh from the crowd. But life had other plans. She told the story, not with drama, but clarity, step by step, word by word. And when she finished, she said, "I've been asked to help train officers. I said yes, not because I think I can fix everything, but because someone has to show what real strength looks like." She looked at the front row. Real strength isn't about making people fear you. It's about keeping yourself in check when no one else is watching. A pause. And even when everyone is watching. The applause came slowly at first, then steady, then a standing ovation. Among those who rose was Sergeant Hayes. He nodded once, that was all. Meanwhile, back at Internal Affairs, Jensen updated Donovan's file one last time. Final status, terminated, use of excessive force, confirmed via multi-source evidence. She stared at the screen for a moment, then closed the file. It didn't erase what had happened, but it meant it wouldn't be buried. Reckoning isn't rage, it's truth, with a spine. And sometimes that's enough to change something, or someone. It wasn't overnight. The training began quietly, early mornings in a repurposed gym at the edge of town. No press, no speeches, just Elena, a few yoga mats, and officers who were unsure why they'd been assigned to her class. The first day was awkward. One officer whispered, "Isn't she the one from the video?" Another muttered, "So what, now we learn Kung Fu?" Elena didn't respond. She simply bowed, as she always did before a lesson. Then she said, "We're not here to fight, we're here to unlearn." That got their attention. The program was called Centerline, named after the invisible axis martial artists Protect and Read. It focused on breath, posture, non-reactivity, and body language. Not takedowns, not tactics, but how to stand without threatening, how to see without judging, how to feel fear and not let it make your decisions for you. At first, many resisted. "Feels soft, too passive. This won't work in the field." But then, the simulations began. Elena would act as a civilian, a teenager, a mother, a man having a mental breakdown. The officers practiced approaching without force, without raised voices, without reaching for a belt. And when they failed, she didn't scold. She asked, "What did you fear?" Not who, but what. It was a question most of them had never been allowed to ask themselves. Word spread. The department began rotating new officers into the program, then sergeants, then lieutenants. Even Chief Delacroix came in for a quiet session. He didn't speak much, but at the end, he bowed too. Elena never asked for praise, but people started asking for her. One evening after class, Sergeant Hayes stopped by. He watched the final bow, waited until the room cleared, then stepped forward with a folded paper in hand. "What's this?" Elena asked. "City is putting together a public safety board," he said. "Community voices, real ones. They want you on it." Elena hesitated. "I'm not political." Hayes smiled. Neither is justice. She took the paper, not as a promise, but as a door. Months later, Elena stood at a new podium, this time not alone. To her left, a public defender. To her right, a social worker. Behind her, a half-dozen people who'd once been afraid to report misconduct. Now they were allies. She looked out at the crowd. Her voice was clear, not rehearsed. "There was a time when I thought my role was to teach people how to survive confrontation," she said. "But I've learned something deeper. Real strength isn't about how well you react. It's about how well you refuse to become what hurt you." The room quieted. Standing still saved my life that night. But what saved others, what changes systems, is when people watch, when they record, when they listen. She took a breath. "I didn't win anything that night in the park, but I didn't lose myself. And that, I think, is what turned a moment into a movement." After the meeting, a young woman approached her in the hallway, nervous, clutching a notebook. "You probably don't remember me," she said, "but I used to take your classes at the community center." Elena smiled. "Of course I do. You were the one who always corrected her own form." The girl laughed. "I didn't think you noticed." Elena touched her shoulder gently. "I notice everything. That's the training." Back at the studio, things returned to normal. Kids learned how to fall without getting hurt. Teens learned how to breathe before they speak. Women learned how to own space without apology. Elena never brought up the park unless someone asked. And when they did, she told it like a lesson, not a war story, because that night wasn't about glory. It was about clarity, about what it means to not strike back, to stand firm without growing hard, to walk away without walking small. This story was never about defeating someone. It was about defeating something. The idea that force is always right, that silence equals submission, that calm is weakness. Elena didn't win with strength. She won with mastery, of self, of space, of energy. And that mastery became a mirror. It showed the world what dignity looks like when it's cornered, and what courage sounds like when it doesn't need to raise its voice. Now the question becomes, when it's your turn to stand, will you stay still or will you strike back? Will you escalate or will you master yourself? Not everyone will face a baton, but all of us face moments where we're tested, provoked, misunderstood. In those moments, remember, you are not what they assume. You are not what they call you. You are not required to meet chaos with chaos. You are required to know who you are. And if you hold that line long enough, the world just might change shape around you. One stance, one breath, one choice at a time. Stand still, speak loud, and never forget, calm is a form of power.